I'm here today with Ashley Abercrombie. Ashley is a speaker and writer whose work and life has been featured in various magazines and digital outlets, including Darling, OprahMag.com, Relevant, and Grit and Virtue. She's the author of Rise of the Truth Teller, Own Your Story, also Tell It Like It Is, and also Live with Holy Gumption. Her most recent book is titled Love is the Resistance, Learning to Disagree, Resolve the Conflicts You've Been Avoiding, and Create Real Change. Love the title. Her YouVersion devotional, Finding God in the Hard Places, has been completed by over 250,000 people. Ashley's the co-host, alongside Tiffany Bloom, of the hilarious and helpful podcast, Why Though? For more than 15 years, Ashley's worked in nonprofit spaces leading faith-based initiatives, serving as a prison chaplain and pastor, and speaking at conferences, churches, and events. She serves as the executive board chair of Treasures, a nonprofit that reaches and supports women in the sex industry and victims of sexual exploitation. Ashley currently resides in Los Angeles, raising her 3 children with her husband, friends, and family. You can learn more about Ashley at ashabercrombie.org. That's ASHABERCROMBIE.org. So Ashley, it's such a pleasure to have you join us. I'm anxious to talk with you and learn more about all the different things that you do.
Well, I'm really excited to be here. As I've already told you before we started the interview, I'm a big fan of your work, and the Writing for Life community has meant a lot to me as a writer and to many of the writers that I work with. So thank you for what you're doing in the world.
Well, thank you so much. I'm just so glad that I stumbled upon you on Twitter. And,
Yeah.
and I heard the title of your new book, and I said, okay, I've got to reach out to this person and see if I can talk with her because, obviously she's in heavily alignment with the things I'm working on. So,
Yes.
but before we get into that, I mean, I'd love to hear more about your background and how did you get to, where you are today?
Yes. Okay. So I'm born and raised in the Southeast in North Carolina and loved where I grew up. I grew up in a smaller town, like population 14,000 people. And so very little. And I learned a lot about myself. I have amazing friends still from that period of time. We've been friends for 30 years. Like it's such a good place to grow up. And at the same time, in a small town, what I learned is that everybody knows you, but nobody really knows you at all. So I feel like I've been on this wonderful journey since leaving my hometown as an 18-year-old to learn what it means to stop pretending and performing, what it means to live an authentic life, what it means to cultivate, neighborliness, what it means to be genuine and true to who you are and the convictions that you carry. And I think for me, that's been a really beautiful journey, and it's looked like recovery. So this month actually is 20 years of recovery for me, sobriety from all kinds of addictions and issues and problems and pain. And so I'm thrilled about that. And in that 20-year gap, I moved to Los Angeles and built a life and, met my husband there in LA, and we had our first baby. And then we did a small 4-year stint in Manhattan. And then we just relocated back to Southern California, literally 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. So we've been
oh my goodness,
trying to restart life in the midst of being in lockdown and figuring out what this looks like. So, none of us have arrived. We've been through a lot of difficult years. And I think my passion for writing has really been a through line of my life. It's been an outlet to process pain. It's been a space where I can figure out what I think about things. It's been an opportunity for me to tell the truth. And I've always wanted to write books. And I was a ghostwriter for many years and then stepped into writing my own books. And I think the books that I chose to write, Rise of the Truth Teller, is about my personal story of recovery and what it looks like for us to be an authentic, genuine person. And then Love is the Resistance. I wrote that as an offering for the times that we are living in, because these are difficult days and we are polarized. We do not have as much capacity for nuance and connection and love. And I wanted to demonstrate that there is a different way forward than the two opposite ends. And I wanted to speak to the collateral damage in the middle of those two opposite ends, which so many of us find ourselves in, wounded and hurt from sectors of society, wounded and hurt from the church, wounded and hurt from the things that we personally experienced. And I wanted to give an offering of how we overcome.
Wow. Well, good for you for making that journey and putting so much toward helping other people,
Yes.
that maybe have gone through similar circumstances.
Yes, it's so important. I mean, nothing is as feels as good as when somebody can exhale and recognize like, oh, I've been through that too. I'm not the only one. I think the cry of the human heart is, am I alone? And
Mhm.
to soothe someone with the response of, no, you're not alone. And you're not the only one who's been through that. And you're not the only one who's going through that. And no, you're not crazy. Like, to normalize people's lived human experience is such an important thing. And I benefited greatly from people doing that for me. So it's a pleasure to be able to do that for others.
Wow. And so, raising kids during the pandemic has been
Yes.
tough, but also when you just move to a new location,
Yeah.
with children, it's hard, right? I mean, that had to be difficult.
Are you kidding? Difficult is like the understatement of the year, right? Like,
Yeah.
we have 3 kids under 7. So a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So actually, like, I gave birth in a mask. Okay.
Mm.
So that's a whole experience. And when people are like, I can't wear a mask to the grocery store, I'm like, oh, you can. I wore one in labor. You can do
Yeah,
this. I
my
promise.
gosh.
Like, it's actually
Wow.
okay. And just figuring out how to homeschool against our will. Yeah. We didn't
Yeah.
have childcare for 2 years because, the pandemic hit and we didn't have the opportunity to hire anyone before it hit. And also we couldn't have people in our homes. And so it has been a really wild experience, and it's pressed me towards my limits more than once. I think I've had to deal with anger and anxiety that I thought I had dealt with
Mm.
again,
Mm.
and make sure that, I'm learning how to process the daily frustrations of life and the things that can feel so out of control, which is difficult for everyone, but I think especially difficult for people in recovery, because when life feels out of control, or you lose your daily rhythms, or you lose the things that are predictable about life, it becomes more tempting to find a way to numb or to find a way to cope that is unhealthy, hurtful, or even harmful. And so I think it's been a really good reminder that, we're all one decision away from stupid at all times.
That's a great way to put it. I haven't heard that term before, but boy, that is spot on.
It's true. It keeps you humble.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I've been there myself. So
Yeah.
anyway, so the new book, I mentioned the title is Love is the Resistance, Learning to Disagree, Resolve the Conflicts You've Been Avoiding, and Create Real Change. How did that come about?
Well, I was looking around at everyone, watching online and in the Facebook comment section and checking people's discourse in real life and watching people at work and just realizing, what we really suck at is conflict. Like, we don't know how to do it. We don't know how to have direct, honest conversations. We don't know how to deal with things in an assertive way. People are either passive aggressive or completely avoidant or completely aggressive. And there is this assertiveness that we can all adopt that helps us have the conversations we need to have, helps us deal with the conflicts that we're avoiding. And we actually can learn to get along with people who disagree with us. I'm not saying to put ourselves in harm's way. I think if somebody is just a full throttle racist, or they, it's like, what can you really do other than walk away? But I do think it's important for us to realize that because someone has a different belief system than we do, or because a neighbor looks differently than we do, that doesn't mean that we have to make up a story about them or blame and shame them for the roots of society, or that we could not find a way to be together in community. And so I really wanted to speak to that. And I recognize too that people were just missing basic communication tools. And honestly, there's no place to learn it. It's not like you go through school and people tell you how to resolve conflict, or like how to deal with the issues that you're avoiding in your family or in your life. You don't learn this anywhere. So we, I think, as spiritual community, have to figure out a way to learn these basic tools that enable us to communicate with others, that enable us to end relationships when we need to, that enable us to persevere through hard things when we need to. And I realized we just didn't have the basic tools. And there was not understanding for why we do what we do and why others do what they do. But when you have understanding, you can grow in compassion, and you can grow in empathy, and you can grow in connection. And so for me, I wanted to help people understand, why do we fight the way we do? And why do we resist coming together? And why do we avoid getting the tools that are necessary for us to have reciprocal, meaningful relationships?
Wow. Wow. So could you talk about a couple of the tools or practices that you highlight in the book, and just share with folks briefly about, a couple of the ones that you'd like to recommend?
Yes, I'd love to. One of the things that I love to practice in the day that we are living in, especially with, our political divides, our fights about, everything under the sun, whether that's at your Thanksgiving dinner table or it's at school, at the PTA board, whatever it is. One of the practices that I have is to cultivate curiosity. So instead of immediately assuming judgment, I try my hardest to suspend judgment, to put aside what I might be thinking in that moment about a person, to put aside the story that I've made up about them, whether it's true or not true, and to ask questions. Wow, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. Can you tell me more about how you arrived there? And immediately you just sort of cultivate an opportunity for connection instead of an opportunity for, fuel on the fire. So curiosity is one of those practices. And I think another one is boundaries, basic boundaries, figuring out like, okay, what are the things that are tolerable for me? What are the things that I need to walk away from? What are the triggers that are in my life when someone says or does this particular thing? Why do I start reacting at a 10 instead of a 2? And what boundary do I need to put in place to prevent that? So curiosity, boundaries are really important. And then I've also cultivated the practice of telling the truth in a way that is candid and clear, and not unkind, but candid and clear. I think that we have to be people who can say the truth. That is very, very important. What we think, what we feel, what we believe, and in such a way that it's not an assault on another person. You're not blaming them or inciting, a big fight with them, but you are communicating, hey, this is what's true for me. I'm not going to apologize for it, and I'm not going to be unkind about it, but this is what's true for me. And as someone who was a master pretender, that's been a 20-year journey for me.
Wow.
And there are still spaces where I feel where it feels difficult, where I'm more tempted to please others, where I feel like I want to not say something, or I don't want to rock the boat, or I don't want to address somebody's inappropriate comment, but I've had to practice doing the hard thing. So I think curiosity, boundaries, and telling the truth are 3 of my main practices.
Wow. Good for you. Wow. I mean, this is real. I love the practicality of,
Yeah.
the book and these areas of advice.
Yeah.
I'd like to read an endorsement for our friend Lisa Sharon Harper. I had actually just done another book interview with Lisa recently for her new book. That just
it's so good. Fortune.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
But Lisa says about your book, love is the resistance brings a healing word to a world writhing in the throes of transition. With the wit of a master storyteller and the care of a pastor, Abercrombie guides readers through a transformational journey they will never forget. So she uses the words guides readers through a transformational journey, which I think is impressive right there. Can you describe how you see that journey that you're helping people with?
Yes. Well, first I want to say how much I love Lisa. And if you are a writer, the way that we've known each other for a little bit, but the way that we deeply connected is we were in a writing group with her organization every Saturday morning.
Oh my goodness.
For Freedom Road. And for 2 years, I was in that writing group, and we were all writing books together and writing different articles. And it was just such a great place to be able to communicate and connect. So if you're a writer, I would highly recommend it. But this idea of guiding a reader through, so that's so important because we are all in this journey of transformation. And one thing I've learned in recovery is that, recovery is for life. I'm not going to arrive one day where I have no character flaws, I have no issues, I have no problems, I have no pain. Like,
we all wish we could do that.
I do. And you know what? For a long time in Christianity, I actually thought I could. I thought that it was like magic pill where someday I would arrive at perfection and stay there, and I've learned through actually reading scripture and through lived experiences that we are all on this journey of becoming. And that has been a really beautiful thing. So I want to meet readers where they are. I don't think that, shame is an effective tool. I don't think that telling people what to do is an effective tool. In fact, one of my writing teachers at UCLA, she used to write in bright red all over my papers about 10 years ago. She'd write, stop preaching at me, because she's like, don't tell me what to do. Like, it's very unhelpful. And that's what I sought to do in this book, is to bring understanding, to meet readers where they are. And then let's walk on a journey together for your next step. What does it mean for you to become more whole? What does it mean for you to become the kind of person who can tell the truth, who can grow in communication, who can learn that love is the most powerful resistance that we have? I think that that's what I really sought to do here. And I love to laugh because hard things also need to be funny. I cannot take a book that just like on its head is never one time, creating a little light in the midst of all that shade. So I think the journey of humor is helpful as a guide as well. So I'm hoping the book is actually truly transformational for people.
So yeah, I mean, well, it sounds like it's got to be. Is there like a group discussion guide that goes along with it? Because it
Yes,
sounds like it's already made for that.
It really is. Yeah. And I put that in the back of the book with lots of great questions that you can ask and connect with others, because it is. And I think this is the kind of thing, the kind of topic that needs to be worked out in community. You need to actually practice these principles and have opportunities to disagree with others and have a new response than maybe you've had in the past that allows for connection and space and presence. So yes, it's ready for that.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, as you know, a large part of our audience are writers. So I'm going to ask you several questions about writing and publishing, if that's okay.
Please, of course.
So you talk about the fact that you kind of started off as a ghostwriter.
You did.
Which, there's a lot of folks that I work with who do that. How did you get started doing that?
Mm-hmm. So I was actually part of a faith community where I was asked to start working on a book with someone, and it started with just a chapter, and they had a few ideas about the chapter, and I put the whole chapter together just like as a young 20-something, and it ended up being really great. And so that sort of started me on the path of ghostwriting. And I was a ghostwriter on 9 books before I kind of put together my own book proposal at the encouragement of a friend who was like, hey, it's time. Like, you've been doing this a really long time for others. Why don't you do this for yourself? And I began to put together a book proposal and start looking for an agent and start figuring out where would I like to be published? What could that look like for me as a new nobody, frankly?
We all start somewhere.
That's exactly right. And that's part of the magic of ghostwriting, right? Because you're empowering another person's voice to go out into the world. And so it was great to be able to kind of start that journey on my own. But I love long form. It's really my deepest passion is long form writing. And I know that's not true for everyone, but that's me. And I'll be doing it whether or not anyone is reading it.
And like, how did you go about getting either your first book deal or this book deal? What did that process look like for you?
Yes. So I began to put together the proposal again at the encouragement of a friend. It was our first year in Manhattan. So this is 6 years ago now, maybe 7 years ago now. And I started to put together a nonfiction book proposal. I actually used Michael Hyatt's template, which is a pretty popular one. And I just began to work that out and started looking for agents and asking questions to see if anyone knew anyone they would be willing to connect me with. Because many of you writers, you probably already know this, but if you don't know this, agents typically respond better if there's some sort of connective tissue between you and them versus kind of a cold query.
Absolutely. It's true for everyone.
Yeah. It is. And I mean, I still encourage the cold queries because like, if that's all you got, that's all you got. And I encourage you to do it. Even if you get a no or not a response, you should still be doing it. But yeah, that's what I did. I just sought out connections, began to send the proposal around, and found an agent for my first 2 books. Yeah.
Networking is amazing, isn't it?
It is. And I suck so hard at it. So it was a real stretch. I'm much more introverted and internal, like a true writer, I think. So that process was a bit of like, hey, I'm out here on the ledge. I hope this works for me. And it did.
So if you could talk a little bit about your writing process, what does that look like?
Yes. Okay. So one of the things that is critical and true for me is that I believe consistency is key. Like I'm old school. I think content really is king, but consistency is key. Because if you only write something once a year that's solid gold, then who cares? And so I have a real rhythm and a practice of creativity that I've cultivated over the last 10 years. And I write no matter what's going on in my life. I write even if it's not going anywhere. And I always start with 2 things: a timer, because there's a beginning, and thank God there's an end. And the other thing is that I always start with is I check my judgment at the door. So I make sure that if in that allotted time that I'm writing, whether that's once a week, pending what's going on with my life, or it's, twice a week, whatever the time I have set for myself to write. But once I set that timer, I don't judge myself. So if I write 50 words or 1,000 words, it is well. And I make sure that that's the habit I'm cultivating. Now, of course, if I'm on a deadline for an article or a freelance or something like that, then you don't have any choice but to get that done. But in my creative writing time, that's what I do. And if I'm stuck, I have creative writing exercises, and I log both a story bank. So in my story bank, there's memories I could pull from. Like maybe I'm just walking and I remember a really cool story that happened in high school that I want to talk about someday, because it proves a larger point about people pleasing or the connections that we hold, or how friendships can wreck or break your life, like whatever that might be. So stories in a bank. And then I also keep random one-liners or titles that I think are great, so that when I sit down for my creative time, I can either pull from a story or I can pull from an idea. And that really helps me kind of cultivate that time. So again, I have lots of writing that's probably never going anywhere, but that keeps me in this rhythm of writing. So when it's time to write something important, I already have things to pull from. I'm in the habit of doing it, and I don't hit a wall very often. Like people talk a lot about the sort of the creative block, and I don't often run into those because I just press myself into writing.
Well, it's great to hear that you've kind of got this library of things you can pull off the shelf.
Yes.
You know what I mean? As part of it. I
Yes.
think that is really wise.
It's critical.
I don't
Yeah.
hear many authors say that. There's some that do, but I don't
Yes.
hear many people tell me that.
Yeah, it's really important. I think that too many writers just try to wait to be inspired. It's like, it doesn't work that way, actually. The more you do it, the more inspired you are. And I think so much of writing is paying attention to life, like paying attention to the interesting, ordinary things that are happening that can then become your stories, your ideas, the things you want to share with others. Just pay attention to the world around you. Like people are very interesting in Target. People are very interesting at the bagel shop. You know, it's like you have so much to learn from the way creation operates. And I think that a writer is really good at paying attention to those subtle nuances that are actually teaching us all the time.
So it used to be a writer only had to worry about writing. And now we all know that marketing is at least as important as writing. So
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about what you've found to be most successful in terms of the
Mm-hmm.
podcast? Is it Twitter? Is it some other mechanism? What are your marketing go-tos?
Okay, so this was really hard for me. And actually it was, like I said, I didn't have a huge platform when I went after a book deal. So my platform has grown significantly over the last 6 years. My email list, the podcast listeners, mostly on Instagram is where I would say I've had the most successful growth. It seems to jive with my personality and who I am. And I love Twitter too, but because I just like the sassiness of it. I love the news. I love being engaged in the world, but that isn't the place I've experienced the most growth. And so I think I had to really figure out, okay, what's going to work? Talking and sharing. So the podcast that I do with my dear friend has been really good because, we can choose a topic to talk about, a question to ask, and share that every single week. And we've cultivated thousands of listeners from being able to just be honest and forthright about what's happening in the world and what, is helping us in our lives. And then with Instagram, same thing. I think it was cultivating words and ideas and being honest and open. And I've had to find that balance between getting pigeonholed in the spiritual faith community as the girl with the story and someone who also has significant offerings to make. So I've really had to find a way to stand on my own 2 feet there. But no, I'm not just a person with a story, but I also can communicate theology, and I have deep thoughts about other things. Like I'm not just going to talk about my story or share everything about my children and my marriage and my life and let that be the way that I market and communicate. And again, I'm not knocking anyone who does. I think it's a very successful model. But for me, I've had to find a way to hold on to my privacy and hold on to my relationships and make sure that I myself am not the brand I'm putting out there, but more my ideas about justice or my ideas about truth or my ideas about relationships and connections and neighborliness. Like let that be the thing that leads. And again, I think it's consistency. You have to figure out, what do I want to cultivate and how am I going to do that consistently? And that's the most important thing. And to not get sunk by it is the final thing I'd want to say to any writer listening, is that, your content is still the most precious gift that you give. And you got to remember that. So I think too many times we can start with platform and marketing, and it is important. I lost several book deals just because the publishers were like, if your platform was this size, we would take you on. We love this manuscript. We love this proposal, but we cannot do it because of your platform. And I was like, well, it is what it is. So I think you have to figure out what you're going to let go of, what's going to be okay for you, but don't let the platform drive your work. because you're going to make yourself crazy, especially if you're a true writer.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I was going to ask you what advice you had for new writers. I think you just gave it. So I'll skip that question. Um, so one thing I have to ask you about, though, in an email, you told me that writing for your life was a huge help to me. I make all my writing cohorts spend time on your website for resources. So first of all, thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
But can you tell me how you found us, and what kind of resources do you find to be most useful?
Okay, so I lead writing cohorts throughout the year with a group called Women's Speaker Collective. So I'll lead 2 to 3 of those where we write a book proposal together, every person who's attending. If you go through the whole process, at the end of it, you'll have a completed book proposal. And I teach you more in depth about some of the things that we're talking about here. And I think that I stumbled across you and writing for your life because I used to ghostwrite, and I was asking someone about rates. And because of that, they were like, hey, you need to check out this particular website. There might be some helpful resources on there. And there's a few people who are also ghostwriters. And so I began to look through the website, and I share now, I make them sign up for your list because the resources that come out are great. And then you have a list of agents and a list of publishers that's entirely helpful and very good for people who are submitting, whether for the first time or trying to figure out what type of publisher they want to be with. And I just think the resources are extremely helpful. And to have it all in one website in one location, it's like, that's the kind of website I'd want to build. I don't have the time for that or the energy for it. You know, it's like something in the back of my brain. So it's like, how about you just look at Brian's site? This is the things we're going to go and they're great.
Well,
so I appreciate it.
I'm always looking for input, though. So, I mean, if there's other ideas of things that you'd like to see there that aren't there, I mean, please let me know. Because
amazing. I will, for sure.
I want nothing more than to make writing for your life as useful as I possibly can for people. So
yeah, it is. I think it's a really great website for people and a huge help to know. And especially in the spiritual writing space, there's not a spot other than that one that I found where everything you could need for writers is there. You might find a book proposal template on somebody's site, and you might find, hey, here's a few agents that people I've worked with on another site, but you're kind of piecemealing everything together. And that website I feel is clear enough where someone who's starting out can go through all the resources that are listed there and have an idea of where to begin. And so that's what I appreciate about it.
Well, it's honestly, it's a hard thing to do because it's kind of like, you know, I want to keep adding information to it, but I also worry about how clear is it organized?
Right.
Because, you know, I don't want to just confuse people or muddle it or whatever, but, you know, so anyway, that's always kind of like one of these constant trade-offs in my mind is
it is
complexity
whenever you're doing
versus
databases.
simplicity, you know.
Exactly. Totally. Well, I like what you offer, so I appreciate it.
So I have to always ask folks too, if you have any plans for future books that you can talk about at this point.
Well, thanks for asking. I don't at this point. I know that I want to write more in the future, but I think, you know, I took a little 3-month break from social media at the end of last year. And truthfully, it was one of the best things that I've done. And it kind of helped me return to like, no, long form writing is what I want to do. It is what I want to do. So I know there's books in the future, but right now I'm in the slow process of moving my writing over to Substack because I really like that platform. It's great for long form writers and people who want to kind of commit to longer essays and a little bit less of the kind of, you know, micro Instagram blogs or, you know, whatever the things are. And I think that's what I'm going to focus on this year is getting that set up, finding a place to house all of my content. And then from there, I want to find out what I want to do next. So I'm going to take a little break because I need one and then just focus on that long form writing.
Awesome. That just sounds wonderful. Real good for you.
Thank you.
Again, the name of her most recent book is Love is the Resistance, Learn to Disagree, Resolve the Conflicts You've Been Avoiding, and Create Real Change. Which, you know, I've got to go out and order a copy of it for myself right now. You can learn more about Ashley and sign up for her email at ashabercrombie.org. So Ashley, again, congratulations on all you've accomplished. And thank you so much for doing all that you do to help people and be a role model for people. I just think it's wonderful.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate it. And thank you for the time.